What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you with the top 10 rookie wide receivers in the 2021 NFL Draft. We are doing this from a fantasy perspective as usual. And what we're trying to determine, basically, we've spent, since January, December time watching film, studying these guys, looking at the numbers, we're getting into pro days now. Obviously, they're in full swing, so we're starting to get testing numbers for a lot of these guys. But what we want to know at this point is who our top 10 is. And I think these might even be more valuable necessarily than us saying doing a rookie mock draft or something like that, because a lot of the time when you guys ask us questions, you'll be like, hey, I have the 103, but my wide receiver room is very good. Or I have the 102, but I don't need running backs or something like that. So when we go through our rankings, obviously you can get a better idea of if you need that position, which way you want to go in your Superflex rookie draft. Because when we do a rookie draft, obviously we're not using the context of actually having a dynasty roster that we're trying to fix. So all of these rankings videos should help supplement that.
Yeah, I mean, again, when you're talking about these rookie drafts, you want to accumulate as much talent as possible. You want to understand that your rookie draft is meant for just taking the best player available. Your actual trading aspect is trading for need. However, if you need a receiver, or if you're looking at receivers and you have a pick that could really gravitate towards, let's just say, the fifth receiver off the board, we're going to be here to inform you who that guy would be for us, who would we be taking at that, let's just say 202. So again, it's going to be different from the consensus. I'll tell you that right now. If you guys are absorbed with Dynasty Fantasy Twitter and you're used to seeing guys like Seth Williams, used to seeing guys like that in the top 6, top 7 of a lot of people's lists, I'll tell you right now, we are going to differentiate from a lot of that consensus. But guess what? We're here to back it up. We're here to tell you why we have guys in certain spots and give you the overall understanding, the overall aspect of how we got to our decisions. So with that being said, I'm excited to get through this. But before we do that, can you hit the intro? Okay, so as I said, we're going to start off with a tie at number 1.
Before we get into that real quick, I just want to break down what we're going to be doing for these guys. So what we're going to do is we're basically just going to break these guys down from a film perspective. We're not going to spend a tremendous amount of time on that because we have other videos, prospect battles, and a number of other mock drafts where we have broken these guys down. So we're going to start off their film, what they do well, and then statistics to back that up. Obviously, we're not just going to be spouting out bullshit. And then what we're going to also do is talk about where we see them getting drafted and maybe some player comparisons, ceiling, floor type situations. And we might even throw in some best fits for these guys like we did for the quarterbacks as well. So as Danny mentioned, yes, we do have a tie at number 1 because you have Devonta Smith, wide receiver from Alabama, at number 1, and I have Jamar Chase, wide receiver from LSU, at number 1. So we'll start with Devonta Smith just because he's got the Heisman Trophy advantage. So what did you see with Smith?
I mean, this is your prototypical receiver on basically every aspect of the game. You're talking about the route running. You're talking about the smart, the savviness, the technicality of the way he plays the game. He is the most refined receiver in this class. If you were to tell me right now that one receiver in this NFL draft would have 85 receptions, 1,100 yards, and 7 touchdowns next year, the one I would guarantee being that guy would be Devonta Smith. Because simply put, he would be a top 20, 25 receiver in the NFL as soon as he walks in. That's the type of level of refinement I see with this guy's game. Now you're talking about the metrics to back it up. This is a cat who won the Heisman Trophy while having the number 1 yards per route run amongst the class in 2020. He was the number 2 quarterback rating when targeted, and he was all around top 5 in lowest drop percentage, top 5 in yards after catch per reception, and he was number 2 in deep targets. So you can kind of see that the metrics alone show you a guy who strives in every single aspect of the game. You're talking about the season itself. Over 2,000 yards, 23 touchdowns. He is just the epitome of dominance in football, college football, quite frankly. And this is a guy who's going to get that draft capital to prove to yourself of that potential usage that we saw in college. He should be going in the top 10. He should be in a spot where he's relied upon as that 1A, 1B almost immediately. I have no problems with Devonta Smith's transition to the NFL game. People want to point at that, oh, he's 170 pounds, he's too light, BMI, yada, yada, yada. I don't care. Guess what? Chad Johnson, he He played at 175 pounds. He said that multiple times that Devonta Smith in college is a much better version than what Chad Johnson, and if you guys don't know that name, Chad Johnson, because you're too young, Chad Ochocinco was in college. So I have no problems with Devonta Smith, and quite frankly, he is going to fix himself into that mid to late first round of every single one of my rookie drafts. And at that point, I am taking the value there 100% of the time.
Yeah, and you talked about the draft capital. I think you summed them up pretty well from a film perspective, so I won't get into too much of that. But when we see who translates, right? What were the guys this year and previous years that have translated quickly to the NFL? The Justin Jeffersons, the A.J. Browns, the Terry McLaurins. It's the route runners, right? Those are the guys that are translating quickly. And I have no questions about Devonta Smith's ability to run routes. He was bar none the best route runner in this class. I don't even think it's really that close. I think there's some great route runners in this class, but I think Devonta Smith is on, much like his teammate last year in Jerry Jeudy, a level of his own in terms of his route running ability. And we saw Calvin Ridley, who I actually have as my comparison for Devonta Smith, who's a lighter guy in his own right. He's like 185 pounds. And another thing that bothers me about Devonta Smith's weight is that everyone pretends like he can't add weight. Like it's impossible that he gets to 185 once he gets on an NFL strength and conditioning program. If he's 6'1", 185, he's the same size as Calvin Ridley. And Calvin Ridley is a consensus top 10 dynasty receiver. And if Devonta Smith lands in a position where we're probably assuming he's going to a Miami, he's going to potentially the Giants, the Eagles, somewhere in that kind of neighborhood, maybe the Lions or something like that, he's going to be expected to be a number 1 or a number 2 receiver right away. And both of us agree that he can do that right away.
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely no weakness to his game. You're talking about the yards after catch. I mean, 8.1 yards after catch per reception this year. Very good. Talking about the hands, 80.7% catch percentage with only a 2.07% drop percentage, both tops in the class. Talking about the separation/release package that he has, that's evidenced by the yards per route run that I mentioned. 4.39 yards per route run is just insanity. You're talking about a guy who was the most efficient receiver in this class, despite having the most volume.
And against SEC competition too, which, I mean, there's not too many small school standout receivers in this class, but you definitely love to see Devonta Smith doing it against the corners that he did against. Absolutely baptizing Derek Stingley a year ago. Like, he's doing this against NFL caliber prospects. Yeah. He's not beating up on bad competition. He does beat up on Sean Wade, who's bad competition, but everyone else who he played against, he made them look silly. And I honestly don't think we need to spend too much more time on him just because.
I'll say one more thing because you mentioned Sean Wade. I still remember going into that Natty game. Sean Wade was like asked about like what he was going to do in the game. He's like, "Oh yeah, no, I'm sticking on Devonta Smith. We got best on best." And Devonta Smith had like 180 yards and 3 touchdowns at half.
Yeah, your draft stock went from like potential back end of the first round to like a third round talent in one game. So
yeah.
Jamar Chase is the next guy that we're going to talk about. And much like Devonta Smith, he did it against SEC competition as well. Jamar Chase, they're very different receivers, obviously. Jamar Chase is much more of that big, physical, prototypical X receiver. That's the way I see him. And I also think that you can use him in mismatch situations, use him in the slot, potentially as a wingback, depending on how versatile a coach is with their play calling and stuff like that at the next level. But the way I see Jamar Chase is much like I see a guy like DJ Moore, someone like Chris Godwin, or someone like AJ Brown, that big physical yak monster type of receiver. And it's very evident in yards per reception. Jamar Chase ranks number 2 in this class.
Dwayne Eskridge is up there.
Dwayne Eskridge is the only one. He had like 48 targets. So it's like very much Jamar Chase was the number 1 person in this class with a lot of volume, obviously. So number 5 in QB rating when targeted. Obviously, we know Joe Burrow was his quarterback. He made Joe Burrow a lot better, much like Joe Burrow made him better. And number 7 in yards per route run in this class. Number 4 in avoided tackles per attempt. First in deep targets. And this is where I really see a big time disconnect between Jamar Chase and someone like Rashod Bateman, for example, is that Jamar Chase was used so well down the field, and it's a big part of his game. He's great at the catch point. He's great in contested catch situations. He's great at tracking the ball, and he has great hands downfield. So this is a guy that can win short if you wanted to use him as like a wingback type, like a Deebo Samuel. He can win deep, which is something that you can't say about a lot of these other receivers that we're going to get to in a couple minutes. He is a guy that wins at all 3 levels of the field and can be, honestly, an A.J. Brown level fantasy asset who is currently like a consensus top 5 dynasty receiver.
Yeah, no, exactly. I have no qualms with Jamar Chase being here at 2. I personally have him as well. Or tied for 1. I personally have him at 2. You're talking about a guy who should get top 10 draft capital, should profile as that prototypical X receiver, can stick on the line, can play physical, and in general, when the ball is in this guy's hands, you're talking about it, 4th in avoided tackles per attempt. That just goes to show the dynamic ability that this guy has of, guess what? You're a 190-pound DB. I'm just going to fling you off me as I go for an extra 7, 8, 9 yards, whatever it may be. This is the prototypical physical receiver of this entire class. And in 2019, as a 19-year-old sophomore doing what he did,
he wiped the floor with like CJ Henderson, who went in the top 10. Like it's what he did at a young age, and we're not big breakout age people, but it's so undeniable that Ja'Marr Chase is going to get better as a player, because when you watch his film, you're like, man, this guy's just scratching the surface. That's the way I looked at his film the couple times that I've gone in and dug into his film on separate occasions now too, because I didn't just sit down, watch 5 games of Ja'Marr Chase and call it a day. I've gone back and watched him like multiple times just because I'm sick of watching bad receivers. I'm like, let's see what the cream of the crop looks like in this class.
Yeah, let's see what a good receiver looks like. So the amount of times I've just referred back to Chase, Smith, and the next guy we're going to talk about in Waddle in this class alone has just been ridiculous. Like, I don't want to be watching like Seth Williams. I want to watch Jaylen Waddle again if I can.
Yeah, exactly.
And don't worry, we're not going to be mentioning Seth Williams at any point in this rankings video. But
I mean, we've mentioned him like 3 times already, and he's not even in the episode. So number 3, as you mentioned it, our number 3 consensus, we both have him as our number 3 receivers. We were different at the top, but we both have Jaylen Waddle as our number 3 receiver. And I mean, this dude is a freak of nature.
I mentioned Devonta Smith as being the most efficient receiver in this class. I may have to dispute that because his teammate may very well take that claim. And you're talking about the efficiency metrics. 3rd in yards per reception, 1st in quarterback rating when targeted, 3rd in yards after the catch per reception, and 2nd in yards after catch per reception, and 3rd in yards per route run. You're talking about a guy who people are going to point to, oh, he didn't have a lot of production across his career. What are you going to do? Well, first of all, you got to take into the context that this Alabama receiving core would literally be probably a top 5 or so unit in the entire NFL in these past 3 years. So let's not just put them on like TCU, Texas Tech, Oklahoma. No. We're talking about a receiving core that would legitimately have 4 or 5 first-round talent type of players. So let's not take into the account, oh, he didn't have 1,200 yards. I don't give a fuck. Because if you watch this guy play,
he would have had a great season if he didn't get hurt this year.
And I mean, people point to the production. When this guy was on pace, he was averaging 120 yards per game. He had a touchdown per game when he was healthy this year. This is a guy, if you were to ask an NFL or any NFL GM, or quite frankly, took a consensus of the 32 NFL GMs, I bet you the one person in this entire draft class at the receiver position that strikes the most fear into a defense, it's Jaylen Waddle. This is the one guy coming out in these next couple years. I don't want to throw around a Tyreek Hill comparison because that is not fair to any single person coming into the NFL. But if there's one receiver that can get to that type of level based off the ability, based off the movement skills, based off the sheer real nuance that I saw in his game compared to what people really want to profile him as, oh, he's John Ross, he's fast. No, he can run routes. He can high point the ball. He's a menace after the catch. It's Jaylen Waddle. And he's elite mover. Again, I mentioned he combines the natural twitchiness with the absolute burners. You're talking about a guy who, quite frankly, if he were to run the 40-yard dash, would probably near that Henry Ruggs 4.27 mark, because we've seen multiple times they actually race each other and we're basically neck and neck throughout it. Overall, this is a clear top 3 receiver for me. And for me, in the grading cycle, him, Chase, and Smith were all between 110 and 112. And he was actually my number 2. The reason why I have him below Chase is because we're talking about it from a fantasy perspective. I just think it's a more natural projection to put Chase into an NFL offense. Sorry. Because I do have questions with what any normal NFL offense would be able to do with Jaylen Waddle's skills, because he's a guy, if you put him with one of the elite offensive coordinators, if you put him with a guy who can really utilize his skill set, he could quite frankly be a top 3-5 receiver in the league. The problem being, if you put him with, let's just say, I don't know, random team, Chicago, Jason Garrett, something like that, That's where I don't know if they can use his skill set the most, which is why I kind of knocked him. But regardless, I'm not knocking him further than 3. This is, in my opinion, arguably the most naturally gifted athlete in this class, given his sheer movement ability.
I want to see him go a little bit later in the draft than he's projected to go, personally, because I want to see him fall to Los Angeles at 13. I want to see him fall to New England at 15. I want to see him fall to Arizona at 16. I want to see him go in that range of the draft because we all know Jaylen Waddle very well could be a top 10 pick, top 8 pick in this draft. But I think it would benefit him more to fall a little bit to some of the better teams. Because if he fell, honestly, imagine if he fell to like the Colts or something like that. Anyway, just either way, the way you think about Jaylen Waddle, obviously he is definitely a much harder projection from a fantasy perspective than someone like Jamar Chase, as you mentioned. But this is still a guy that has that. He's the only person that I will ever say has Tyreek Hill potential, because everyone knows how much I loved Henry Ruggs last year. I never once compared him to Tyreek Hill because Henry Ruggs had the straight line speed that Tyreek Hill has. He didn't have the twitchy movement ability that Tyreek Hill has, and nobody has that combination that I've ever seen other than Jaylen Waddle. So that's the type of potential you can see with Jaylen Waddle. Obviously, landing spot will be very big for him, whereas I think Smith and Chase are a little bit more universal fits.
And that's what ultimately
offense. I think any NFL offensive coordinator would know how to use those guys.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of mentioned it there. That's what I alluded to. And that Smith and Chase, you can see them basically profiling in any single offense. Waddle's the type of guy where an NFL offense would have to build around him. An NFL offense would have to scheme around him because, quite frankly, again, his skill set is not paralleled or unparalleled, really, compared to what we've seen really in the NFL. I mean, overall, Jaylen Waddle, he's my vote for the most fun receiver to watch in this class because you watch him on film. Let's just, for reference, we're going to mention Rondale Moore in a bit, but Jaylen Waddle's yards after catch per reception was better than any single season of Rondale Moore's yards per reception. So
yeah, which is crazy. Yeah. So Rashod Bateman's the next guy that we have on the list here. He's our number 4 receiver. I believe we both have him at number 4 as well.
Yeah.
Rashod Bateman is an interesting study, obviously, because it's kind of a tale of 2 seasons in terms of his production and some of his film, honestly, too. I would venture a guess that people who don't like Rashod Bateman only watch film from this year. And the reason I say that is because he was still pretty efficient this year. In both seasons, 2019 and this past year, he had 3.45 yards per route run or better, which would both be top 5 in this class. But the big thing for Rashod Bateman this year was that he had a 10.91 drop percentage. And his hands were a big-time question in a number of games that you saw where he was just dropping easy ones. And another thing that is a big deal with Rashod Bateman, too, was his usage this year. In 2019, when Tyler Johnson was the number 1 receiver, the number 1 target on that offense, he had a 29.5% deep target percentage and 528 deep receiving yards and 5 touchdowns on 28 deep targets. So he was used as a X receiver, honestly. That's kind of how he was used. He was used down the field and he was used to stretch the field, even though that's not really like what he does best, but he can do it very well. And then this year, he only had 9.1% deep target percentage, only 77 yards and 0 deep touchdowns. So, and he only had 5 deep targets total of 20 plus yards. So this is a guy that was completely neutered, in my opinion, the way that he was used. I don't think he was used.
We could say he got Tanner Morgan.
He got Tanner Morgan, yeah. And I think when you look at his 2019 film, when you look at his 2019 metrics, that is more the prototypical usage that you're going to be able to see from him in the NFL. That's what NFL coaches are going to see and want to be able to pull out of Rashod Bateman. It would not shock me if, for a fantasy perspective, Rashod Bateman became that true Allen Robinson, Michael Thomas, PPR monster that ends up making him outscore all these other guys in fantasy, because that kind of number 1 target is hard to find. And I think Rashod Bateman is a guy that is going to go high in the NFL draft. I think the media is high on Rashod Bateman, but I seriously think this guy could go in the top 10 in the NFL draft. I think there's a chance that he goes ahead of guys like Jaylen Waddle and even Devonta Smith potentially.
Really, eh?
Yeah.
I do think his floor, for example, for me,
I think 15 is a good spot for him for New England. I think they're really going to like him.
15 is a very good spot. I've mentioned multiple times that I think Chicago would make sense if he made it there. Washington could really use
Indianapolis is like his dream landing spot, in my opinion.
Yeah. Imagine Indianapolis if they had Pittman and him. Man, Let's not even talk about the fact that T.Y. Hilton was brought back because that guy's garbage. But in the 4 games he plays this year. But you basically hit the nail on the head. I'm not really going to mention much when it comes to Rashod Bateman's film because you covered it mostly. Talking about a guy who, again, you mentioned prototypical boundary receiver, physical at the line, can be that Michael Thomas, Allen Robinson. And heck, if you want to move him in the slot and use him like a Keenan Allen, I wouldn't be opposed to that whatsoever because I think he's a very versatile weapon from that regard. He's my clear 4 in this class. He actually great. I mentioned the other 3 graded between 110 and 112. He was not far off. He was a 107, so he's late first for me. I think he's fantastic, and in the right situation, I wouldn't be opposed to even moving him up on my rankings, give or take the landing spots. Because at the end of the day here, we're doing the top 10 before the draft. Landing spots are going to have a huge impact on the ultimate outlook of going into these guys' real dynasty value 2021 season and everything. So very weirdly worded, but you know what I mean by that.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, Rashod Bateman, we expect him to go in the first round. I think he's almost like a lock to go in the first round.
Yeah.
And I also think the range of teams that we talked about is probably about the landing spot that you're looking at between that 10 maybe to 25 range in terms of draft capital. So he's a guy that definitely is going to check a lot of boxes, and he does check a lot of boxes analytically as well. So if you're an analytics person, he's got an early breakout age, he's got a high college dominator, he's got all those things, size, everything's in his favor. So it's going to be interesting to see how fast he is. Obviously, Minnesota's Pro Day is probably coming up soon. I would like to see him get towards the 4.5s. I want to see him like Amon-Ra St. Brown. We're going to talk about in a bit. He ran a 4.51 today. If Rashod Bateman can run that, I think that's a great time for him. So if that's the and there's reports that Rashod Bateman's faster than that based on like the Exos combine and stuff. But I think if he just gets low 4.5s, he's going to be perfectly fine.
Hey, I don't really want to take too much stock into the Exos combine because apparently Tylan Wallace ran a 4.39 at the Expos.
No way he runs
not a chance. Yeah. Not a chance. I saw like a mid 4.5 guy on film. Let's not even get into that because I can talk. Anyways, let's talk about the next guy. And this is the guy you first spotted. He's your pet cat. But I'll tell you, I have him at 5 as well now. I've gone to the point. Elijah Moore is a certified stud. Talk about your boy, Corey, and why he is the best Moore in this class as opposed to public opinion.
Yeah, and not only is he the best Moore in this class, I also think he's the best small receiver in this class. Like, I'm not including Jaylen Waddle in that because he's just a freak. But I think he's the best 5'9", 190-pound receiver in this class, and there's a lot of them. We got Rondale Moore, he's not 5'9", but we got Rondale Moore, we got Kadarius Toney, a number of other guys. Elijah Moore, to me, is the most complete of those guys because I think, yes, he's a slot receiver. He played about 81% of his snaps from the slot this year, but he was number 5 in this class in yards per route run, which is indicative of him being efficient with his targets, and his ADOT was much higher than those guys, Kadarius Toney and Rondale Moore's. He was number 1 in the class in drop percentage, the lowest percentage of drops. And Devonta Smith was the only guy that was like really close to him in terms of like a tier break between those guys with receivers that had at least 50 plus targets. So he's a guy that has very sure hands. He's very tough, very physical, top 5 in the class in avoided tackles, top 8 in avoided tackle percentage. And he had a lot of production too. Another one of these guys that checks a lot of boxes from a production standpoint. Back to his freshman year, he had, I believe it was like 450 yards in his freshman season with DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, DeMarcus Lodge, and Dawson Knox to compete for targets with. So the fact that he was able to produce that much as an 18-year-old was really impressive to me because those guys are like, we've seen AJ Brown and DK Metcalf in the NFL. Those are tier 1 talents. And if you're able to even produce marginally from that perspective, then I'm impressed with you. And not only that, but he showed his special teams versatility during that time as well. So this is honestly a guy that I can see fitting into a lot of roles in the NFL. I think coaches are really going to like this guy. I think the NFL will be higher on this dude than the media or draft Twitter or fantasy Twitter is because, again, I mentioned he's a slot receiver, but despite only having 19 deep targets, which wasn't even that low of a number, Moore had 490 yards and 4 touchdowns on those 19 deep targets. So he's a dude that can give you work down the field as well. So he's not just your close range slot receiver that can only give you like first downs and stuff. I see him as a true weapon, and he's a guy that I actually compared to Tyler Lockett. If you guys want to maybe picture a player for Elijah Moore, I think that's the type of route runner, the type of physical, tough, small, scrappy receiver that you're getting with Elijah Moore.
I think that's a great comparison for him. You mentioned it. He's got that dog mentality. He's got that ability that, quite frankly, he's going to stretch you out. He's going to get you after the catch. He does not care how he beats you. He's determined to beat you. And we even saw it again against Alabama, for example. He had a fantastic game going up against arguably the best secondary in college football last year. It just goes to show the sheer level of ability that he has. So, I mean, you hit his film nuances to a T. I think Elijah Moore is, quite frankly, the last of the fringe 1-2.
And I think he's the most underrated receiver in this class too. Because
Easily.
I mean, I challenge you guys to find another two people that have him at wide receiver 5, because I guarantee we're the highest on him out of anybody. Because even people that like him will probably still have him behind
7 or 8.
Yeah, they'll probably still have him 7 or 8 behind some of the
Rondale.
guys that we're going to mention in a bit. But I seriously think this dude is a first-round talent. I have a first-round grade on him.
Yeah, no, and definitely. I fully agree. I think if he finds his way into that late first round area, actually, not even mentioning draft capital right now, he is currently my 201 in Superflex rookie drafts. You could probably get him at like the 301, 302, 303.
Yeah, he's literally consistently going like around the 3rd round range. And that might change if he gets first or early 2nd round draft capital and goes to like a decent landing spot. But everyone wants to talk about Green Bay as the best landing spot. This is the type of dude Green Bay needs. This is a guy that, like, we know how much Aaron Rodgers hates when people are dropping passes. This dude ain't dropping anything. And he's also very physical, very tough. He's a type of dude that Aaron Rodgers would love, because honestly, he's like a better version of Randall Cobb.
Yeah, no, and exactly. So overall, again, you mentioned we are going to be the highest in the industry, having him at 5. If you are having your rookie drafts right now, hopefully you're not, but if you are, or if you're drafting draft picks, or if you're doing a startup right now, and you can get that type of value that Elijah Moore is currently going at, take it and run, because the amount of talent on this kid is just insane. He is, as you mentioned, the most underrated receiver in this class. And heck, we could probably do a whole separate video as to why he is the most underrated receiver in this class. But anyways, let's get into the next guy. A guy that we both really like as well, a guy that we both have at number 6, and quite frankly is like the polar opposite type of receiver to what Elijah Moore represents. That's going to be Dyami Brown from North Carolina. Just going over his metrics to kind of show you what type of receiver is, because as soon as I mention these, you're going to know what he is. 4th in yards per reception, 6th in deep targets, 1st in deep target percentage, 3rd most deep receiving yards. What is that? What do you guys get from that? He is the typical boundary receiving threat that really every NFL team covets nowadays, because he's your classic big play outside threat that combines both the speed and the tracking ability to absolutely burn you over the top on really any given game or any given play. I mean, the North Carolina offense as a whole, as we've mentioned multiple times, was an absolute blast to watch with NFL talent. And Dyami Brown was basically their ultimate bailout. Like if things were not going wrong, guess what? Dyami Brown is somewhere open down the field. Let's get him the ball. I mean, he could completely turn the complexion of a game in really any moment. He's our consensus 6, and quite frankly, I expect him to get day 2 type capital, 2nd round, mid-2nd round type capital, which is about where I have him graded. If that's the case, I think he can have a huge impact for an offense. And quite frankly, in that area, they're going to be able to utilize his skill set to the best of his ability. Plug him on the outside, let him beat you deep, and let's see what he can do, because I think his talent could be that 70 reception, 1,000 yard, 8 touchdown type receiver. I think he's got that in his bag. I know you have similar thoughts of Dyami as well. What are your what do you notice, or what else you want to highlight about his game that I didn't cover?
Yeah, so we're getting into niche territory, right? Like, the guys we're talking about now are not Jamar Chase. They're not Devonta Smith. They're not Jerry Jeudy or CeeDee Lamb from last year. They're not going to be guys that come into the NFL and they do everything for an offense and they're going to be number 1 receivers. I don't think Dyami Brown has what it takes to be a number 1 receiver. I think he can be a tremendous number 2 receiver, though. I think the guy I compared him to is DJ Chark, and I think DJ Chark, what DJ Chark is, he does it very well. He stretches the field. He's a big presence. He has great downfield tracking ability. And I don't necessarily think Dyami Brown's going to put up the 40 time that DJ Chark put up, because I think he ran like a 4.3 flat or something like that. But Dyami Brown is deceptively fast, and he's very physical at the catch point. And basically, he checks every box you want from a downfield weapon. And I think if you have a number 1 on your team that you need a downfield guy opposite that number 1, this is the type of guy you're gonna really covet. And I think that team is Tennessee. If Tennessee grabs Dyami Brown as their number 2 receiver opposite AJ Brown, I think that's a perfect match for those two guys.
Yeah, no, I agree. That would be amazing to watch. Just get the Browns together in Tennessee. Let's have some fireworks. Because let's be honest, if Dyami Brown landed across from AJ Brown, again, I mentioned that 70 for 1,008. I think that would be a gimme. I think that would be his floor.
Give him a heavy play action team too. That's like another really big thing for Dyami Brown. I think it's very easy to envision his role in the NFL. And I think that's what NFL evaluators are going to like about him, is that they know exactly how to use this guy. Because the thing with Rondale Moore and Jaylen Waddle even is that you do need some creativity to know how to use this guy. You can put Dyami Brown on the outside and give him a route tree similar to Mike Evans. Hey, dude, just run goes, posts, comebacks, and curls for us, and you'll be a pretty productive receiver. So that's Dyami Brown. If you guys haven't checked him out, because he's not really the biggest name guy, I would encourage you to go watch some tape of him, because I think he's a guy that is really impressive to me. I didn't expect to like him as much as I did when I first watched him, and I was really impressed with what he can bring to the table.
Same. If you were to have told me going into watching Dyami Brown that I would end up having him as my wide receiver 6, I probably would have laughed. I probably would not have expected that whatsoever. Right now, Dyami Brown is holding a 102 out of 120, aka a mid-second round grade for me. Keep in mind, that's 5 points off of where I have Bateman. Now, again, there is a discrepancy because Bateman is a much more overall complete receiver. But it just goes to show you that Dyami Brown, what he's really good at, he scores really well in. So, I mean, I absolutely love Brown's game. Again, as you mentioned, get him to Tennessee. Let's see that happen. Let's see those fireworks.
I do want to see how fast he runs, though, because he, as a deep threat, he does need to have 4.4 speed. I think if he doesn't run in the 4.4s, it's probably a bit of a disappointment. I have him pegged at 4.46 as my guess right now, and I've been quite accurate, to be honest, on these projected 40 times. So I think that's about the range of speed that you're looking for. Even if he runs like a 4.49, 4.48, I think that's adequate for what he brings to the table, because he's like a long strider, deceptively fast and really physical and good at hand fighting. So I think regardless of how fast he is, I think he's going to be effective as a deep threat.
I had him at 4.43, so I'm kind of right in that range as well. Anyways, let's mention the next guy. I talked about AJ Brown. We just talked about Dyami Brown. Let's talk about another Brown, only let's add St. Brown to it, or Saint to it. You know what I mean. That's going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown from the USC Trojans, the actual son of a former Mr. Universe. A little fun fact right there. But let's talk about Amon-Ra. This is your prototypical jack of all trades, master of none type receiver. He can give you a little bit in every aspect, but he's not going to be elite at any single aspect. And we had numbers for everybody else. I couldn't really find any elite numbers for him. The one that I think will basically sum up his game is 6th in slot usage in 2019, because what I expect from Amon-Ra is that he is going to step in day 1, day 2 draft capital, and going to be a starting slot receiver on an NFL team. And I really think he could be a good, solid number 2 slot for any team and have that Tyler Boyd-like impact in the right situation as that possession receiver. Again, you mentioned he is one of the most safe players in this class because his projection to the NFL is basically exactly what you see on film. He's going to be that chain mover. He's going to be that guy. Oh, guess what? It's 3rd and 4. I need a conversion. Guess what? Amon-Ra is going to be open on the slant. Amon-Ra is going to be open on that out route. Amon-Ra is just going to be open. You can trust him. He's reliable. Similar to, again, what we saw from Tyler Boyd throughout these last 3 years. And Tyler Boyd, similar situation. Day 2 draft capital, land in a situation where you could come in, be that number 2, be that slot receiver, and he has carved out a very productive career for himself. A perennial
wide receiver 1 in fantasy. And another guy that I see very similar aspects of Amon-Ra's game is Jarvis Landry, who's also been a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. So if you think he's like a low ceiling guy, like both of those guys I would consider low ceiling guys, but they've both been wide receiver 1s in fantasy. So just because Amon-Ra St. Brown isn't Jamar Chase and isn't going to be a number 1 receiver and potentially a top 5 dynasty receiver someday, doesn't mean he can't a year from now be in that huge tier of like really good, productive young receivers that we're dealing with right now with guys like T. Higgins and Brandon Ayuk and stuff. I definitely could see Amon-Ra having a productive rookie season and getting into that kind of tier this time next year. So I think he offers a little bit more than some people give him credit for. I think he can go up and get it. I think he can provide some after the catch. But again, it's not his strength. He's not going to break 7 tackles after the catch and run you over on his way to the end zone. But he can bring some aspects to his game. I don't really see a Juju Smith-Schuster comparison with him. I know that's the lazy one because he goes to USC. Yeah. I really like Jarvis Landry and Tyler Boyd as the comparisons for Amon-Ra St. Brown. And in terms of draft capital, I tweeted out earlier today that I think he's going to be a guy that the NFL values very highly as well. I think NFL teams are going to pick him in the top 50 picks because they know exactly what they're getting. He's like a 5'11", like 190-pound slot receiver that is going to be probably pretty productive right away because I think he's very pro-ready as well.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Talk about pro-ready. This is your guy. Anyways, let's talk about the next guy, a guy that a lot of people at home are
probably not very pro-ready, but
yeah, well, a lot of people at home are probably thinking, hey, they're not mentioning a guy who's in that consensus top 5, in that consensus top 3 by some people. I don't know what those people are getting their facts from, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about the Twitter darling himself. Let's talk about Mr. 42.5-inch vert. Let's talk about Mr. 5'7" himself. Talk about Rondale Moore. What you notice about Rondale Moore's game. And quite frankly, you're lower on him than I am. But talk about it. Talk about why he's not that complete receiver that people want to make him out to be.
Yeah, and it's honestly nothing against – I mean, it is kind of against Rondale Moore. But basically what I see with Rondale Moore is I'm not going to call him a gadget guy because I think he is more than that. I think – what he offers is undeniable, right? You turn on the film. He has 3 elite traits, in my opinion, which is 3 more than Amon-Ra St. Brown has, by the way. But he is elite speed, right? He ran a 4.29 40-yard dash, and I don't think they fudged that number. I think that's like exactly what he ran because I think he's that fast. He is elite after the catch. He had 37 missed tackles forced in 2018, which was his big breakout season his freshman year that got him onto the scene, which was a rate of 32%, which if you compare that to all the numbers in this class for this season is the highest in the class. So he's great after the catch. And he also is very versatile, right? So he can be used on special teams on punt returns. He can be used in the screen game. He can be used in the backfield. He can be used in the slot. The only problem I have, there's a couple problems I have with Rondale Moore. One is that he doesn't have the greatest hands in the world. I think he has a number of drops, especially in 2018 in his breakout season. You're going to see him drop a lot of passes. And I think another big knock on him is that he didn't really get used downfield very much. He was very much a close to the line of scrimmage player. Part of that could be because Purdue's quarterback situation is not Joe Burrow, for example, and you can't use a guy down the field if your quarterback can't hit the broadside of a barn. But you didn't see it at all, really. And that's the really concerning thing with Rondale Moore's usage. But the ADOT of 5.5 aside, this is a guy that can very much be a weapon in the NFL. He can very much be a Curtis Samuel, I don't even really know who else to compare him to because he is a very unique player. As you mentioned, he's 5'7", 180 pounds, and
your
basically
comparison.
A freak of nature athlete. Sir, what did you
say? Just say your comparison.
My comparison is Deontay Harris from the New Orleans Saints. And if you guys don't know who that is, maybe go look up some highlights of him or something. But he's basically a special teams player for the Saints. So that's not really a knock against Rondale Moore, but he's a guy that is super explosive. Anytime he has the ball in his hands on a punt return, in the backfield, on carries or whatever, he's just a guy that gets things done. And I honestly think Sean Payton doesn't use him enough. I think he should use him more than he does. And that's the type of role I see for Rondale Moore in the NFL. Of course, I think he's going to be used more than that. I think he has more of a ceiling than Deontay Harris does, but I think that's the type of player we're talking about, right? It's pretty much, they're exactly the same size too. So
yeah.
And athletic wise, speed wise, I think they bring a lot of the same things to the table. I'm going to pound the table for this right now. This is bar none the most landing spot dependent receiver in this class. And it's not even really all that close for me. I think where he goes in the draft in terms of draft capital and where his landing spot is can make or break his fantasy value from that moment.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I mean, you mentioned a spot that would be fantastic for him. A spot like the Chargers, a spot like the Jets. I would absolutely love that. Let's just imagine it right now. The Jets draft Zach Wilson. They're feeling good. They added to the offensive line a little bit in the draft. You go in, you add Rondale Moore with that second-round pick. You let Mike LaFleur just have fun with them.
Yeah, and that's why we're saying the Jets, by the way. The Jets have Mike LaFleur, who is with Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco, who obviously saw how Kyle Shanahan deployed guys like Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, and his brother Matt LaFleur, obviously. Honestly, I don't even hate the comparison of seeing how Matt LaFleur deploys Aaron Jones, because you could deploy Rondale Moore in that fashion as well, the way that he's split out wide and used in the red zone as a receiver. I think this is a very versatile player, but What I don't want people to do is see a landing spot and just assume it's good because there's target volume, because I don't know if this guy can ever be a complete receiver. I do think he's going to be limited in some fashion, and that's why he's my wide receiver 10 and not my wide receiver 4 or 5 like some people have him. I think there's a lot more complete pro-ready receivers that fit a lot more schemes in the NFL above him.
Yeah, I mean, and for reference right now, he's Bush's 10, my current 7. And talking about it, I do see he's right now, I have Dyami Brown at 6, him at 7. And you mentioning one trick pony with Dyami Brown to agree, even though I don't think he's that's the case, but limited players is basically what I would want to say. Rondale Moore is that
guy.
Combine
them, they'd be awesome.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Could you, like, I was about to say they're the polar opposite for what they represent. But anyways, you mentioned Rondale Moore. I also do have some concerns with the smarts and awareness part of the game. He didn't really seem like the most aware player. He didn't really seem like he knew exactly what his assignment was, exactly what he was supposed to be doing on any given play. He kind of just make shit happen.
The way I've described him before too is the kid at recess that no one can tag. Like, that's basically the Purdue offensive coordinator was like, dude, we need to get the ball to Rondale 15 times a game if we want any chance of winning the game, because nobody can cover this guy. And it's not because he's an elite route runner or anything. It's because he's way too fast and way too agile for anybody to get near him. So he's a guy that has completely, in my opinion, relied on pure athleticism. And that's not, I mean, he's probably going to be able to do that in the NFL to some degree. So it's not a complete knock on him, but you're right. He doesn't have the football nuance, the route running ability. Like, he's going to get open because he's fast and agile, but he doesn't have the nuance or the toughness really, unless the ball's in his hands, in my opinion, to like get there and run block with the best of them or anything like that. So this is a guy that has a couple holes in his game. He's 5'7", like 185 pounds, which is not the type of size profile that we like from fantasy wide receivers. So this is a guy that would definitely have to be an outlier for him to be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy.
Yeah, and we haven't even mentioned the biggest concern about his game, and that's not actually the game itself. That's the intensive injury history that he's faced. Keep in mind, this guy has not played a full season since his first season as a true freshman. Again, until medical doctors really step in and say, oh, he's got actual injury concerns, I'm not as worried about it. But it's still in the back of my head when I'm considering.
It's just another box that he doesn't check. That's my thing with
exactly.
With any player, with any prospect. You want to be checking boxes all the way down. You go to like film, is like, because that's the first thing I want to look for. Is like, is this guy actually good at football, right? And then you get into, okay, well, how big is he? How fast does he run? Is he physical? Is he a dog? Does he jump out the gym? Like, all this stuff. And Rondale Moore is like probably one of the most pound for pound supreme athletes in this draft at any position. So this is a dude that I have no questions about his athletic ability. All of the questions I have about him are relating to his landing spot, and a very good landing spot could sully a lot of concerns I have for Rondale Moore. And I'll be all the way in on Rondale Moore if he goes to a spot that I think is really beneficial for his usage. So the next guy that we're going to get into is my number 8 receiver, I believe, and he's your number 11 or 12 receiver.
My 12 right now, yeah.
Yeah, so that's Tamorrion Terry. And if you guys follow me on Twitter, you probably know that I'm a big fan of this guy. But the reason I like him so much, and he's like, in terms of a size profile, he's definitely the opposite of what Rondale Moore brings to the table. I think he weighed in at about 6'3", 210 pounds at his pro day, and he ran in the 4.4. So this is a height, weight, speed type of athlete, and he's productive too. That's the other thing that you got to take away from Tamorrion Terry. On film, when you watch this guy, I see a very fluid mover for his size. I didn't think he was going to be as fluid of a mover as he is. I thought he was going to be more stiff, like a Denzel Mims, for example, of someone of his size profile. But this is a guy that was number 2 in this class, his 2019 season. So another thing, before I get into any of these metrics that I want to talk about, is Tamorrion Terry was so banged up this year in 2020. He had a number of like knee scopes and knee surgeries after the season that to me indicated the fact that he wasn't healthy. And he also was used as like a short area possession receiver, kind of similar to Rashod Bateman in that aspect, where I didn't think he was used to his fullest potential that he was in 2019. And in 2019, real quick, I just want to go over, he was number 2 in yards after catch per reception among this draft class, and number 1 if you exclude Dwayne Eskridge, who only had 48 targets. So this is a guy that could make things happen after the catch for a bigger receiver. And he did it on the outside. He was only used 9.5% of the time from the slot, so he was a pure outside receiver for the most part. Yards per reception was top 5 in the class, top 3 if you exclude guys like Dwayne Eskridge, who only had 48 targets. So this is a guy that can make things happen down the field, and he was also used closer to the line of scrimmage as well, and he has that size profile of an X receiver. So he has some concerns. Yes, he wasn't productive really this season. He has somewhat questionable hands at times, but this is a guy that has a big-time ceiling, and he kind of reminds me a little bit of Chase Claypool from last year.
Yeah, no, I definitely see that as well. And you mentioned it was so weird this year because, again, I watched some tape, and their quarterback play was just awful.
Yeah.
Awful. And the one game where you kind of saw like everything click this year was that game against Notre Dame.
And that's good competition he was going
through. Tamorrion Terry was basically uncoverable in that game. When I was watching it, I couldn't believe. I see the quarterback just leaving clean pockets and underthrowing other receivers and stuff like that. And yet Tamorrion Terry, I still believe, put up 9 for 150 and a touchdown in that game, despite awful quarterback play. So, again, you mentioned everything with Terry. I do see a guy with a tremendous ceiling. I currently have him as my 12. I still have a late second on him. That's how deep this receiver class is. The fact that I have 12 receivers in the first 2 rounds of my grading. Easy, like in general, again, you're going to mention that, maybe he's limited as a player as of now. Everybody in the second round is going to be a limited player unless you're just a Amon-Ra and you're good at everything. Tamorrion Terry is elite at what he's good at. And that's what's going to get him the draft capital. That's what's going to get him the bag in the NFL, being that prototypical 6'4", 250-pound speed threat on the outside that, quite frankly, when he is on his game, can be almost uncoverable at times. So I do agree again.
This is a guy, a couple things real quick. You mentioned the Notre Dame game. If you look at when that game happened, it was early in October when he was still healthy this season. So after that game and after a couple games after that, that's when he started to really deal with injuries. And that's some of the games that I watched of him initially. And I was like, I don't know if this guy's really for me. But yeah, like Tamorrion Terry, and I would encourage all of you to kind of adopt this philosophy. And this would have helped you hit on a guy like Chase Claypool last year, is when you're and this is a guy that's going in the 3rd round of rookie drafts. This is not a dude that you have to draft at the back of the 1st or in the early 2nd. I will own him in every single Dynasty league if he goes in the 3rd round. And he's a guy that can hit big. He's a guy that can become a Chase Claypool, a Kenny Golladay from a number of years ago, who was like a 3rd round pick who broke out. This is a dude that has a high ceiling, and he has the size profile and everything in his favor. His production profile is tremendous. That can make him a top Dynasty receiver. And that's not something that you can say about some of these smaller guys that we're talking about, like Kadarius Toney, for example. And I think that's the really intriguing thing for me with Tamorrion Terry is that at this point in my rookie drafts, let me just swing for the fences and go for the guy that can become that number 1 receiver.
Yeah, and like a quick talk as well. Like you mentioned, like what we saw from him on tape. It's not even like his analytic situation is even bad, quite frankly.
No, he checks a lot of the boxes in the class.
That's what I'm saying. 71st percentile college DOM, 51st percentile breakout age, which like we mentioned multiple times. We think breakout age is one of the most redundant.
And it's still above the 50th percentile too.
And it's still above 50th percentile. And the yards per reception in the 70th percentile. So this guy does meet those efficiency analytical metrics that, quite frankly, we do balance out with the film that we do watch. So with that being said, anyways, this video is kind of getting long, so let's just get into the last guy, number 10 on the list. And this is a guy who, quite frankly, I do believe the NFL is going to have really in a much higher viewpoint than what we have him at. And that's going to be Kadarius Toney, wide receiver from Florida. This is a guy who I think is going to be able to get that top 30, 40 type draft capital. I think his floor would be like 35. Like the NFL
real quick is a guy that I think is the opposite case of some of the guys that we're talking about. I think the NFL could be lower on him than the media is, because if you think about it, a lot of the media guys are really high on this guy, right? And the media guys have some connections, like the Mel Kipers and the Daniel Jeremiahs, but they get stuff like this wrong too. And I seriously think that Kadarius Toney could be a little bit of a media creation, and he might go a bit lower than we're anticipating. But as of right now, in our heads at least, it seems like this dude's almost a lock to go in the 1st round.
Yeah, I mean, like every single mock draft from those high-profile guys like Daniel Jeremiah, guys like Charlie Casserly, Bucky Brooks, all these guys that have basically made a name for themselves. He's always going in that 19, 20, 21, 28 type range. And it just goes to show you that if he gets that type of draft capital, as bad as his profile is, and
it's bad,
frankly,
yeah,
it's the worst in the class.
It is the worst in the class. So I wrote, again, for those of you who don't follow me on Twitter, go ahead and do that. Follow us both. But I tweeted out an article that I wrote for the Fantasy Scouts last week talking about the anatomy of a fantasy wide receiver, which I did for the quarterbacks and I will be doing for the running backs and tight ends as well. But Kadarius Toney has red, which is bad, in 4 of the 6 categories. The only thing that he is like yellow in, which is good, is he's faster than a 4.6 receiver, and he is going to get projected top 3 round draft capital. The other areas, his size, he's a smaller receiver. He's under 6 foot, and he's probably about 185 pounds. And his college dominator rating, which, I mean, he went to school with some talented receivers. Like,
it's not like we're Alabama here.
Yeah,
it's not like we're talking
Van Jefferson and like some guys that are going to get drafted, like Trayvon Grimes and I can't remember the other guy's name, Tyree Cleveland. But this isn't a guy that went to school with Jaylen Waddle and Devonta Smith and Jerry Jeudy. So I would have expected him to at least get a better dominator rating than that. And then his breakout age is terrible. It's like one of the worst in the class. So
yeah,
and this is a guy that brings some things to the table. He does some things very well. He's very tough. He's very physical. He is really good short area agility. He's great at creating instant separation. And I think he also has pretty good hands as well. And he's good after the catch. But he is limited in some areas. He didn't have a lot of downfield production. He was primarily a slot receiver. And again, the size, the late breakout, all that stuff contributes. I know the big argument for Kadarius Toney is the fact that he was a quarterback coming to Florida and he had to learn the position and stuff. But even still, I think he should have probably been productive last year instead of just this year. So I will knock him for some of those things. But again, if he lands as a Kansas City Chief or something like that, then we'll probably have to change our tune on this guy. But as of right now, he is a guy that I would take below some of these guys because, as I mentioned, with a guy like Tamorrion Terry, I know that top wide receiver 1 ceiling is there with Tamorrion Terry. And it's not something I'm just manufacturing based on his size. It's really there because we saw it at Florida State in 2019. So he's a guy that I'm going to Kadarius Toney is a guy that I'm going to lower compared to some of the other guys that I think have higher ceilings than him.
Yeah, I mean, again, we mentioned the analytical perspective. Let's just give him some respect from the film because film alone, if that was the only thing that mattered, you would think that this guy was just an absolute
2020 film specifically.
2020 film, yes. You would just think he's an absolute dynamo. I mean, you mentioned the absolute instant separation that he creates, the reliability that he has on the underneath game. This is a guy, we use this term a lot when describing NFL talents, when describing real football talents. He is the make you miss in a phone booth guy. He's going to be that type of guy where you have him squared up, you're ready to tackle him, and then he's just not there anymore. He just Houdini'd your ass because guess what? You're on the ground and he's running 3, 4, 5 yards past you. I mean, it's just such a weird case as to why he only produced this year. Because if you just exclusively watch this year, you would see a dynamic talent at the position. But because he didn't do it before this year, I have to knock it completely because, again, you have to balance out the profile. If a guy like, let's just say, Rondale Moore, for example, did it at a younger age, Amon-Ra St. Brown did it at a younger age, Dyami Brown, all these guys did it more consistently for the past few years. So you have to give them their respect. Whereas Toney, I would say, probably had the best year comparatively out of these guys in 2020. But it's just not enough of a sample size.
True, man. Like, I think Elijah Moore's film was better than Toney's film.
I'm not putting Elijah Moore in
I know, but like that's the thing because a lot of people think that's a surprising take that we would say Elijah Moore is better than Kadarius Toney. And I think he's significantly better than him. Not only from his production, which is way better, but to his film and what he offers as a complete receiver, because I do think he's a more complete player than Kadarius Toney. So yeah, like we said, we're lower on Kadarius Toney, but obviously he's going to be a guy that is impacted by landing spot as well because he is a bit more of a niche player, and he should get pretty high draft capital too.
And I'll be the first one to admit right now, he's, I believe, currently my 11. He's your 9. If he does not get top 40, 50 draft capital, I have no problem absolutely tanking him in my rankings. The reason why he's even the reason why he's even this high right now is because of the projected draft capital that we're seeing in these mock drafts. If he does not even get that, there's a lot of concerns here. Again, he's a very talented player, but the problem is he's such a niche player to the point that his niche isn't even the most valuable thing that we look for to predict fantasy production. At least when you're looking at a Tamorrion Terry, a Dyami Brown, they have valuable niches. They have valuable roles. I don't know if Kadarius Toney comparatively has as valuable a role as those guys would.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we make, like, the fantasy community in general makes a big deal about age all the time, but it does matter when you're 23 years old.
Yeah.
Like he's 23 years old beating up on 18, 19, 20-year-olds, right? It's to me, it's not a big difference between when you're 20 versus like when you're 22 or whatever, or 21 or whatever. But when you're 23 playing against some guys that might be 18, 19 years old, like damn right you're going to school them. You've been playing football way longer than them. So I think that's another thing that you got to take into account as well. So Kadarius Toney is a guy that we're not exactly the highest on. I compared him to like a more athletic or more explosive Randall Cobb. I already kind of talked about Randall Cobb earlier, but that is kind of like the type of role I see for him in the NFL. He's a true slot receiver to me. I don't think he really has the ability to play on the outside consistently. So he's our wide receiver 10. Real quick, we'll just talk about some honorable mentions. Not really go into too much detail. If you guys know this class pretty well, you'll notice that we didn't mention Terrace Marshall from LSU. The reason that is honestly, I don't really see a high ceiling player. I see a guy that is going to be a productive, maybe not even productive, a competent NFL wide receiver that could be a number 3, maybe a number 2 at best option in the NFL. And I see a guy that is pretty stiff, doesn't offer much after the catch. And he didn't seem all that physical. I didn't see that dog mentality when I watched Terrace Marshall. So he's a guy that I'm lower on. I'm fine to be lower on. And he's a guy also that I don't think is going to get the draft capital that people think he's going to get.
Yeah, no, I agree. Again, I have Marshall higher than you. I have him at 9 right now, comparatively. But I do see him as a limited player at this point. He's very stiff. Doesn't really offer much after the catch. And
he reminds me of Rashard Higgins is who he reminds me of, who's a good receiver, but he's not like a fantasy superstar.
Yeah, to a degree. I do think he's got a better ceiling than that. A guy like maybe even like a Kenny Britt is probably what he could profile as at his ceiling. And Kenny Britt for a good amount of years with that 900 fringe 1,000-yard receiver. And in the right situation, I do see that Terrace Marshall has that type of potential because, again, his size, his speed, he's got the just frame of a prototypical number 2, 3 outside
and his profile is very good as well. And he did it at school where he had a lot of competition for targets and he did produce. So that I'm not discounting that on him. My concern with him is actually more on film than it is metrics or anything related to that. So he's a guy that didn't pass the eye test for me personally. So obviously if he lands in a better situation and he definitely has the ability to grow into a better receiver. I just personally didn't see it that way. So he's a guy that I'm lower on. Amari Rodgers, real quick, Clemson wide receiver, obviously played with Trevor Lawrence.
Good slot.
He's a good slot receiver also. Another one of these 5'9", 190-pound slot. He's actually a bit thicker than those guys. He's like 210 pounds.
220, no?
Yeah, he's a big dude. So he's a guy that is more a running back size, I would say, than a wide receiver size. So he's one of those wing backs, those Deebo Samuel types. And
hey, let's just Antonio Gibson him.
yeah, he could definitely get Antonio Gibson, honestly. So he's a guy that I think all depends on landing spot, all depends on draft capital. He's a dude that could definitely rise a ton, though. If he goes to a good landing spot in the second round or something like that, he's a guy that I would definitely have to go back, watch a lot more of his film, see how he kind of fits into whatever his new offense is, and reevaluate from that point. Because he's a guy that I'm kind of in a wait-and-see approach with. And I've watched him, but I haven't watched him super, super in-depth and been like, yeah, this guy's like the dude that's going to be a late-round flyer that works out great for fantasy.
I know this sounds crazy, but if a team drafts him as a running back, where would you like figure him to be in those rankings? Like, I wouldn't be opposed to having.
I think he's a good enough receiver that I think I'd rather have him as a receiver. I don't think he's. I don't know. I think
it's weird though, right?
Yeah, it's intriguing. It's definitely intriguing, but I haven't seen him run the ball enough to know that like he's like has good vision and all the things that go into playing running back. I don't think he has like that kind of like with Gibson. He was used enough in that area that you could see the potential for that.
That's fair.
And even with Gibson, we saw him get out to a bit of a slower start in the receiving game and stuff like that too. So I think Amari Rodgers is a guy that definitely keep on your radar, but and gauge where he's going in drafts. Like if you get him in the third round of rookie drafts and stuff, I think that's phenomenal value for him.
Yeah, and let's talk about the final honorable mention. That's going to be Jaylen Waddle. He's a very solid receiver, and he's kind of just a worse version of what Amon-Ra St. Brown kind of represents. Because I do think he's more limited at some of the aspects than Amon-Ra. I think Amon-Ra's really, like just solid at everything.
I don't think he creates separation like Amon-Ra.
He doesn't create separation like Amon-Ra. He's not even as good as after the catch as Amon-Ra. I can actually go through my notes right now because I wrote him up for the draft guide. He doesn't. I don't even think he's the athlete.
If he runs a 4.51, would you be impressed? Because that's what
Yes.
Amon-Ra ran. I would be impressed if Tylen Wallace ran a 4.51.
I did not see even that on his film. Like, again, mid 4.5 again is probably about what you'd expect. The thing about him is the best attribute of his game makes no sense compared to what his frame is. Because again, this is a 5'10", maybe 5'11" on tippy toes type receiver. But the best aspect of his game is his hands and his contested catch.
They grow him like that at Oklahoma State, though. James Washington was like a deep threat that ran like a 4.6. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, they have like skill sets that don't match their frame or their athletic ability, but they're just good. And that's kind of how I see Tylen Wallace as well. I'm not going to compare him to James Washington, but he is kind of the same type of player, to be honest. Like a physical, contested catch, kind of can be used downfield, but he's not like really great at anything, to be honest. Like, he's good at a lot of things, but not great at anything. Again, similar to Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I do think St. Brown brings more closer to elite traits than Tylen Wallace does.
Let's just talk about it real quick, though. James Washington's profile, from like an athletic profile's perspective, would not shock me in the slightest as to what Tylen Wallace was doing. We're talking about a guy 5'11", 213 pounds.
That's actually bigger than Tylen Wallace. Wallace won't weigh that heavy.
Yeah, no. 32-inch arms, 4.54 speed. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if Tylen Wallace kind of like entered that type of territory.
Honestly, that sounds about right to me. So, I mean, he's a guy, again, you got to pay attention to draft capital, landing spot, all that stuff. But to me, he's a guy that doesn't have that high of a ceiling personally. So if he's going ahead, and I'm willing to bet there's people out there that will take this guy ahead of guys like Elijah Moore.
They'll take him in the second.
Definitely ahead of guys like Tamorrion Terry and stuff. So I would definitely just let someone else take him personally, because I think he's, especially if he goes to a good landing spot too, I have a feeling his stock is going to rise a little bit too high for me. And I'll just let someone else take him at that point. So personally, he's a guy I'm avoiding. I really didn't like too much of what I saw. I have to watch a little bit more of him, but he's a guy that I think is kind of limited.
For sure. And with that being said, anything else you want to talk about, or should we wrap this thing up?
No, I think we're good. As a general rule, guys, once we get past this range of receivers, just take your guys. Third, fourth round rookie picks, take whoever you want. If you're in 5 dynasty leagues, take the same guy in all 5, because then if he hits, then you got an asset for a long time that you really believed in. And again, draft capital will always play a part in this, as will landing spots and stuff like that. So anyone that we didn't talk about, it's not because we hate them. It's just because we kind of want to see where they get drafted and kind of how their situation goes once we go from there. I think the guys that we talked about, for the most part, I would consider top 3 round receivers. Maybe we missed a couple guys here and there that might get drafted that high, but that's who we're going to talk about. If you guys enjoyed this, make sure you comment on the video, comment any of your thoughts, your own rankings, maybe some of the things you disagree with ours. We're happy to engage with you there. Comment protein shake, because Danny always has protein shakes, to know that you made it this far in the video. Let me know what you think of my, I can't even point correctly. I'm literally pointing in the wrong direction, but I have a Super Bowl 55 champion Antoine Winfield Jr. Jersey right behind me. Let me know what you think of that. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, like the video, all that good stuff. And make sure you guys are tuned in for the running back and tight end videos that we're going to be coming out with. And then we're going to have a number of strategy videos and how to evaluate videos launching on the channel very soon. So make sure you guys are subscribed. You'll want to be paying attention to that with rookie drafts and the NFL draft itself coming up soon.
100%. Peace out, y'all.